2020 will be the year of anime-exclusive archetypes and cards finally getting printed and coming to the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG and OCG. Now, why do I say that? Well, we have already had two really cool announcements in regards to this topic. Jim Crocodile Cook's fossil cards, which so many of us have wanted printed for so long now, are finally coming to the TCG and OCG a little later this year, after Konami had fans vote on what anime archetype they wanted to see printed. We also got Yami Marik's Obelisk Slime token printed as a card. Really never thought that would happen. And so in the span of probably about 2 weeks, we have gotten a lot of news in regards to older archetypes, some being anime exclusive, some just being existing archetypes that were based from the anime getting support. And I really do think that 2020, even though it has been a very disappointing and horrible year for, I think, all of us, honestly, it's really been terrible, and we're not even out of April yet. This is something that we as Yu-Gi-Oh fans can look forward to. I really do think that we are going to be getting a lot of anime exclusive support based on the decks that we have already gotten and the cards that we have already gotten so far in 2020. So in this video, I wanted to go over one archetype from every single Yu-Gi-Oh series, Duel Monsters all the way through VRAINS, that I would like to see printed in the TCG and OCG. I hope you guys play along and let me know down in the comments. You can only pick one from each show. Let's get into it. I hope you all enjoy. Kicking off this list is a selection from Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. Yes, as crazy as it sounds, there are still decks from this series which aired almost 20 years ago that we are still waiting on. While I think a lot of the shows have good debates as to what fans would want to see printed if they had to only select one, I feel like the deck from Duel Monsters will be a bit more universal. The archetype I have to pick is Valen's Armor archetype. I feel like this deck is adored and loved by so many of us, myself included, because of how well done his duel was against Joey. Maybe Yu-Gi-Oh! Is still waiting for virtual reality to become a more consistent thing before printing this deck. That way you can actually put the armor on just like Valen did in the show. Until that happens, you wouldn't actually be able to put the armor on when you summon cards and actually fight your opponent, which might take away some of the fun of this deck. The style of this deck is really unique since all of the armor cards have no attack points and just rely on card effects to destroy your opponent's monsters and deal effect damage. A card of note is Psychic Armorhead, which is a monster that allows you to add an armor monster from your deck to your hand instead of conducting your draw phase. The deck has always really intrigued me, and I think it would be a lot of fun to play. Trying to summon as many armor cards to your field to increase their strength and ability seems like a really cool gimmick. I will reiterate that part of me does genuinely feel like the deck was only so cool because of how it was animated and used in the show, and I do wonder if it would translate to being as fun in the actual game. But with how unique that duel was and how adored this deck still is, I couldn't not put it as my top personal pick from Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. Not only is my pick from GX, in my opinion, the coolest anime-exclusive archetype there is, but it's one that I think many people would go crazy with if it was ever printed. The archetype embodies the same dark energy that the character who uses them does, and that deck is none other than the Darkness archetype. The deck is used by, well, wouldn't you know, Darkness, the main antagonist in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. I have always viewed Darkness, or Night Shroud in the dub, as the legit representation of Satan or the devil in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Universe. I think using his deck, which sadly we only got to see in action one time during the final duel between him and Judai, would be so much fun. What is super interesting about this archetype is we actually do have a couple cards from it that are printed. Darkness Neosphere is the big boss of this deck, and is a card that was actually printed and released, as well as Darkness Destroyer. Unfortunately, besides these two cards, all of the other Darkness cards have not been printed. The main core of this archetype revolves around its trap cards, Infinity and Zero, which allows Darkness to use Darkness 1, Darkness 2, or Darkness 3. Darkness was able to control these trap cards in the anime, and some of the effects from these cards are absolutely devastating. It's still pretty incredible to me that Judai was able to pull out the win. Cards like Darkness Seed, Neosphere, and Darkness Bramble bring your life points up to 4,000 if they are below that during the end phase. Even though Neosphere is printed, a lot of the cards that are good for summoning it quickly and easily are not, so I still feel like the core elements of this deck remain anime exclusive, and until they are printed, Darkness will always be a majority anime exclusive deck. It's one of my favorites, and if Konami ever does make the decision to print the rest of this deck, I will be a very happy guy. Fujiwara Yusuke's Clear World cards are a decently close second place, but this deck is one that will always be on top of my wish list. So 5Ds was actually a super challenging one. I genuinely struggled to even think about a deck that is anime exclusive, seeing as how all the mainstream characters' decks and even the side characters have been printed. Therefore, my pick is a pretty underwhelming one, but in honor of this video, it was really the only deck that I could come up with, and that is Lawton's Gun Ogre deck. I never thought I'd be talking about this clown's deck in a video, but hey, 2020 continues to be a weird and disappointing year. Lawton was the main antagonist during the mini Crashtown arc, and used this deck in duels against Yusei and Kiryu. The deck is super small, and literally only has 4 monsters to it. Those monsters are Gatling Ogre, which is the one that many of you probably remember. It was utilized by him to perform FTKs. Full Armor Ogre, Blaster Ogre, and Big Cannon Ogre are the other 3, and that is it. But again, with 5Ds, it was really hard to find any anime-only decks, and this was the one I found to be the most memorable. The whole style of this deck revolves around effect damage. The combo I just alluded to with Gatling Ogre is able to be pulled off due to its effect. The combo allows you to load your bullets by placing cards in the spell and trap zone, and by removing those cards with Gatling Ogre, you can deal 800 points of damage for each. So if you have 5 in the spell and trap zone, you can deal 4,000 points of damage right off the bat. Not very great in real life, absolutely lethal in the anime. Lawton would always seem to start with 4 or 5 spell and trap cards as well as Gatling Ogre in his hand, which led to some unique counters Yusei and Kiryu would have to pull off when dueling against him. All the ogres have really good synergy with one another and can usually special summon another ogre when they are destroyed. I don't know if anyone would actually be willing to play with this deck. There are certainly not nearly enough cards to make this a full deck based around them, but with a limited choice pool, this one is at the top of my 5Ds list. Interested to hear what decks you'll be picking, especially from this series. Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal. There's one deck that really stands out and shines above the others. No, it's not Dawn Thousands cards, although that would be cool, but it's a deck that I think has a lot more potential. That is the New Order archetype. The deck was used by Eliphas, a fellow member of Astroworld, when he took on Yuma in a duel. The New Order deck was really cool to watch and has a bunch of different Xyz monsters, including a rank 12 and rank 13. Because of this, the spell card Rank Up Magic Astral Force and Ascension Spiral are essential to continue to get high-ranking Xyz monsters onto your field. Ascension Spiral allows you to rank up a monster by 2 ranks instead of 1, which is important for this deck since most of its Xyz monsters go up in rank by 2 as opposed to 1. All of the Xyz monsters in this deck look really awesome, and if you're able to summon New Order 13 Etheric Amon, you probably have game. The monster has 5,000 attack and 4,000 defense, and cannot be destroyed by card effects or battle. If this deck ever did get printed, I would imagine it would need some main deck monsters and maybe some traps and spells that can also help it out. The New Order monsters are specifically referring to the Xyz set, and I'm pretty sure Eliphas never even summoned a normal monster in the one duel he had, as he used a spell to go right into New Order rank 4. But with some main deck support, I could see this deck actually being pretty solid in the TCG/OCG. This is probably the deck that I feel has the most potential on this list, and I really do hope we see the New Order cards printed in the not so distant future. They look awesome. Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5. A lot of really cool decks from this show. Fun fact, Shinji Weber's Battle Wasp/B-Force cards got printed not too long ago, so maybe there's hope for another anime-exclusive Arc 5 deck to be printed soon. If I had my way, I would easily pick Sergei's Earthbound Servants. This deck was used by Sergei in Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, and for those of you that don't know, Sergei was nuts. One of the most vicious characters in the franchise, this deck fits him perfectly, as he used them to defeat Yuya, believe it or not. He was stopped by Jack Atlas, which makes that duel even more symbolic, since it was Jack once again defeating and stopping a character that used Earthbounds. The Servants are a subtype of the Earthbound archetype that I just mentioned, which are famous for having the Earthbound Immortals used by the the Dark Signers and 5Ds. I loved when I first saw these monsters in action. It was such an awesome ode to the Earthbound Immortals from the Dark Signers arc. While these monsters are not nearly as big as the Immortals, they are still pretty terrifying in their own right. Those glowing Nazca lines in the skin are always so unsettling, just knowing the evil and destruction that they represent. I am probably in the minority, but I actually think I prefer the designs of the Servants more than the Immortals. We have a Fusion Servant and a Synchro Servant. Combining both of these gives you Earthbound Servant YuGiOh Grasha, and that is the go-to move of this deck. Not only does this card have 3000 attack, but if it battles a Fusion or Synchro monster the opponent controls while there is a field spell in play, the monster deals a direct attack to the opponent. The conditions are very specific and probably makes it not even worth to go into, but maybe if it was printed, the requirements and effect would be slightly different and would make YuGiOh Grasha a really lethal monster. If this archetype ever did get printed, I feel like a good amount of cards would need to be added to it and make it more viable in duels. But regardless, all the servants have really interesting effects, and I would love to see this sub-archetype printed. Not only are you getting Arc 5 nostalgia, but you are also getting 5D's nostalgia, and anything that leads to a double dose of nostalgia is going to be something I am fully on board with. Reira's CCC archetype is a pretty close second, but Earthbound Servants are my YuGiOh Arc 5 wishlist deck. YuGiOh VRAINS was pretty difficult, seeing as there are many different potential decks to choose from. You have Lightning's Armadas Legios, Windy's Storm Riders, Blood Shepherd's Drones, just to name a few. But the one that still reigns supreme as my favorite from VRAINS is Spectre's Sun Avalons. I really like this deck, and maybe it's just because Spectre was such a fun character to watch, even though his role in the show was completely diminished in the final season. This deck I could imagine would be very annoying to play against, but it is a lot of fun to watch. It's a perfect deck for a villain or a duelist who just likes to annoy their opponent, since the deck is based around defensive and healing tactics. Due to how well this deck can regain life points and defend itself, it can feel very hopeless at times that you will ever break through. A major requirement for this deck to flow well is that you have to have a Sun Avalon on your field for most of the spell and trap cards to be used. However, this really doesn't pose as much of an issue, since Sun Avalon monsters have an effect that doesn't allow it to be targeted for an attack, so that kind of mitigates any struggle for always having to keep one on the field. The deck has a lot of solid spell and trap card options, including a trap known as Sun Avalon Force, which can also prevent your Sun Avalons from being targeted by card effects. Also, the Sunvine Thrasher Link monster is one of my favorite designed monsters in VRAINS. I love the design of him, and it's one of the few monsters in this deck that can actually inflict some pretty solid damage. The trap Sunbloom Doom can be incredibly useful to regain a lot of life points, and it was one of the last traps Spectre had to activate in his duel against Blue Angel, right before basically breaking her neck. Again, this archetype has plenty of spell and trap support cards, and it makes this archetype pretty potent. All in all, Sun Avalon was a very fun deck to watch in VRAINS. Maybe it was just Spectre being a very enjoyable villain to watch, but either way, Sun Avalons are my VRAINS archetype. And that about wraps it up, guys. That was one anime-exclusive archetype from every single YuGiOh series, Duel Monsters all the way through VRAINS, that I would like to see printed. Please let me know if you had to pick one deck from each show, from each series, which deck you would pick. Funny enough, Fossils, they wouldn't be at Darkness's level, but Fossils were probably just below where I would rank Darkness, and now Clear World is obviously the runner-up in GX decks, but it's really cool still that Fossils are getting printed, and who knows, maybe one of these 6 decks, or maybe a couple of them, will be printed before this year, 2020, which again, for the most part, has been a very, very horrible year, will come to an end, but we will see about that. Excited to hear your choices down below. A special thank you to my Platinum tier patrons Alexa Baker, Glen McGookin, Jorge Carrillo, Horace Maye, Goosey Q, Vincent Van Der Veen, Panther J, Smith620, Jorge Leon, Blue Maiden 28, Jarrett Buller, Gabe G, and Aura Dragon, and to my Diamond tier patrons Jesse Wood, Latrell Smith, Sean, and Melinda Phantom, and to my Egyptian God tier patron Syn Cloud. Thank you to everyone who is a patron, and thank you to everyone who is a channel member, and thank you to everyone who just watches my videos. Without all of you guys, I would not be able to do this. Thank you all so much for watching. I will talk to you down below, and I hope you have an amazing day.